We have with us Patrick Lodge Otieno Lumumba, that's 61 year old, born July 17, 1962. He is the director of the Kenya School of Law, earned his LLB and LLM degrees at the University of Nairobi.
It's okay. I left being the director of the Kenya
Okay. So that means there is an update. I am coming to you right there. Just trying to introduce. So there is an update right there. But he got his PhD in laws from C of the University of Ghent in Belgium, and his thesis was entitled "The Exclusive Economic Zone: The Use of Delimitation of Economic Zones." He also did his LMTC's titled National Security and Fundamental Rights. So he's a man who cuts across. He's an orator, an outspoken one, heavily followed across the world, especially the African continent. Welcome, sir.
Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm glad to have this conversation with you. But in order to ensure that I'm not accused of misrepresentation, I was the director of Kenya School of Law, but that was 4 years ago. I served my term, and somebody is now serving. It's important to point out that
Perfect.
Current reality.
That is perfect. How's life? You are a busy man. You are all across. You are invited to speak at different places. You are involved in different things. How is life with you?
Life is a struggle. Life is about one's contribution, and what we are doing as we travel across Africa and the world is to reawaken the African spirit, to give practical meaning to Pan-Africanism, standing as we are on the shoulders of those who preceded us. And what one does when one has the opportunity or create the opportunity is to make one's contribution. That is what I am doing, making my contribution in the knowledge and in the hope that our little contributions put together will create a tsunami which will bring about positive change in the continent of Africa to our sons and daughters within the continent and in the diaspora.
You have this gift for gap and oration and logic and wisdom. What is the motivation? Where is it from?
When one speaks the language of the heart through the lips, one does what is good and right to the extent that is possible. So I speak from my heart, I speak from conviction, I speak from the things that I know, and I try to speak about things that are practical with what I consider to be a honest view and honest intention. I don't succeed all the times, but I succeed most of the time.
Well, you have been a guest of the International Association of Judges, having some programs in Liberia to come and speak. I followed your speech online today, talking about different issues of justice and the judicial systems across the continent and all of that. What is key in terms of the delivery of justice, the rule of law, the implementation of the rule of law across African countries? What is more important?
You know, justice is an avenue along which all of us walk. And the signposts are the laws which we are supposed to observe. The judges are the custodians. And the conversation that we have had here in Monrovia with judges from 14 African countries is to discuss the value of integrity. Integrity to ensure that the men and women who have the honor and privilege of serving as judges dispense justice in accordance with law from a standpoint of integrity. And we have asserted that integrity is something that must ensure that one does that which is good and right because it is good to do so. And it requires men and women who are fearless. It requires men and women who are patriotic. It requires men and women who are knowledgeable. It requires men and women who are warriors for justice, because justice is what guarantees that people live in a society, their station in life notwithstanding.
Yeah, and you were talking also about the contextualization of the dispensation of justice in terms of local context. And
Yes.
yeah, you want to advance on that. Why is it important?
You know, if you don't contextualize the administration of justice, then you are a stranger. You come to Liberia and there are certain things that Liberia and even different Liberian communities want to be done. If you are administering justice relating to land, and you go to the land of the Mandinka or the Malinke or to the Kisi peoples, and you are not sensitive to the realities, then what you consider to be justice will be resisted. If you go to a society and you don't consider their tradition and you don't consider how they do things, then your brand of justice will invariably be discarded and you'll create discord into the community. We live in a world today where there is what I call cultural imperialism. And this cultural imperialism is coming, as it has always done, from particularly Europe and America. And we also see elements of it from China and different parts of the world. It is therefore important that those who are administering justice in various African countries are sensitive to the realities. We have a saying in Kiswahili that he or she who abandons culture is a slave. And therefore, if you want to be true to yourself, if you want to enjoy your freedom to the fullest, you've got to understand the environment in which you operate. You've got to be agile. As a student of martial arts, I always remember this.
Yeah, you're also a student of martial arts.
Yeah,
okay, I see why you look fit. Even
Yeah.
at 61 years, you look quite younger.
Oh, yeah. Bruce Lee used to say that if you want to be a good martial artist, you must be like water. Water can be liquid. Water can be it can be a gas. Water can also be solid. And in its liquid form, it occupies and takes the shape of whatever it occupies without changing its quality and character. And that is what we need to adopt and adapt in order to be relevant. Remember also that Africa does not exist in isolation. We exist as a part of the world, but even in that, we must never lose our character. You can make a forest, but each tree has its distinctive and distinct quality.
Well, but then people could argue that justice is like air. It is cosmic. The tenets of justice, the moral laws are supposed to be cosmic. Yeah. They are supposed to apply to all, no matter where a person lives.
That is what I call sophistry. People can argue about anything. But we know that what is justice, the justice of the slave owner is not the justice of the slave. The justice of those who operated camps in Nazi Germany was not the same justice that was perceived by those whom they were victimizing. The justice of the architects of apartheid was not the justice that can be described as universal. So there are certain elements that you can say to be universal. Take, for example, in 1948, when the international community, in the absence of Africa, says that certain rights are universal. Were Africans present during that time? No, they were not. When the colonial administration said that Africans were less than human beings, was that justice? So it is right to say that there are certain things that can now be considered to be of a universal character, but justice must also be contextual. Decontextualized justice is injustice. And that is one of the things that we must accept. Will we have a unanimous position? No. Unanimity only exists in the graveyard. When you have human beings, even when you talk about things that appear to be obvious, they'll be debated. But ultimately, even in the midst of debate, there is what must emerge as the acceptable standard from which, if you deviate, then society punishes you.
And that would drive me to the issue of war and economic crimes. For example, our country for years of civil war, and there has been this push for the establishment of a war on economic crime, scope to punish those who bear the greatest responsibilities for the war. Recently, our president signed the, 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 the executive order for the establishment of an office that will go after the processes of implementing this war economic crimes, praised by the Americans and the Europeans as being a good path for our country. What do you think?
Let me tell you, history has demonstrated not once, not twice, but times without number, that if crimes are not punished, they'll be repeated again. Impunity is the mother's milk of terror. And it is therefore always important that if a society goes through a process where certain individuals or groups of individuals have perpetrated certain crimes, they ought to be taken through a process to determine their culpability. Will it always be right? Not always. That is why there must be a mix. Those who know have always said that in order to ensure that there is sustainable peace, those who bear the greatest responsibility must be punished. But it's also important that memories are selective so that you reconcile society. And I will give you a recent example. After the genocide in Rwanda in 1994, the international community created the International Tribunal for Rwanda. Those who committed the most egregious of the crimes were punished. But the Rwandese administration, post-genocide, in their wisdom, then went back into their tradition, into the Gacaca courts. And they said, in order to reconcile society, we are going to allow the perpetrators to come forth and repent, then we'll forgive them. That happened, and the society is going through a process of reconciliation. In South Africa, after apartheid, the Truth, Justice, and Reconciliation Commission was also put together for purposes of healing the society. In Mozambique, during the administration of President Samora Moises Machel, those who had collaborated with the Portuguese were named and shamed. Then they were rehabilitated. My point is, we must never allow impunity to bestride our societies, because if that happens, then society will be visited by the same pain again. But if people are tried and those who are culpable are found guilty and punished or forgiven, it doesn't mean that those who are found to be culpable will be punished, but at least it will give the society an opportunity to reconcile.
Let us get that point. Yes. Punished or forgiven. Yes. So it becomes a responsibility of the society whether they want to forgive them or to punish them.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, because we have a whole lot to talk about.
Yes.
So, thankfully, you also headed the Kenya Anti-Corruption Commission at one point in time.
Mm-hmm.
Corruption, you've always spoken against it. It ties in with the issues of poverty that cloud the continent. Countries are so rich, like for example, our country, rich in a whole lot of resources, with a highly younger population and all of that. But we are still poor. We sit among and over riches and resources, but we are still poor. What is happening here?
You know, the conundrum of poverty in Africa is an oxymoron, and I'm using this very deliberately. We are possibly one of the richest continents on earth with the poorest people on earth. Mm-hmm. And even if you look at the individual countries, look at the resources, the rubber, the ore, the uranium, the gold, the diamond, our soils which are fertile. One person once said that poverty is a choice which African politicians have chosen because it is in their best interest to keep their populations poor so that they can manipulate them. Mm. And I hold the view that African countries are number one poor because the quality of leadership that we consistently give ourselves are not in the business of trying to resolve the problems that chain our people. It is also true that there are external players who, because of our disorganization and the greed of our politicians, continue to manipulate us, with the consequence that our country's resources are still exported in their raw form to those countries. And thirdly, we ourselves, we the population, are also complicit, because when we are given an opportunity to elect good men and women, invariably in Africa, 9 out of 10 times, we choose, as I've said before, we choose hyenas to take care of our goats. And when the goats begin to die, we begin to wonder what is happening. So
highlight a few things that Professor Lumumba is lamenting on here. When he mentioned, by the way, good evening, good afternoon, good night, depending on where you're joining us from. I just wanted to highlight few things in this particular deliberation. Few things that touch me personally um, when Professor Lumumba mentioned we the people, we are often found electing leaders who don't care about us. And I'm going to repeat that portion of this interview just to remind some of us Liberians, because what we have done times without number is we have continuously empowered corrupt politicians who don't care about you and I, corrupt politicians who are about themselves and are consistently acting against the will of the people. But the people themselves contribute to these kind of behaviors. And when you listen to Professor Lumumba, he is simply saying, you are also enablers. You are enablers because you will not in any way, shape, or form go to work. Your supervisor is ill treating you, and you sit there supinely, shut your mouth, do nothing about it, and it happened continuously, and you sit and celebrate. The next thing you would do as a logical person is to find reason as to why that supervisor or manager should not have to supervise your activities. Because as a person, you have rights. Unfortunately, in Liberia, it is the opposite. We tend to glorify, we tend to celebrate corrupt politicians. We tend to celebrate and create our own heroes in people who are sincerely about either stealing or pretending as though they care about your future or the better society, when in all reality that is not the truth. I'm going to rewind this portion of the interview because I feel like he actually struck a point that needs to actually be grilled. Literally, we must carve it on the skull or probably on the brain of every Liberian to start thinking. Because as things go, the way we're looking at things now, we don't have much time. You're literally sitting on 6 years of having to repeat what you have done for the past 100 and some more years. Now you were given the opportunity where you were given several choices, not just one or two political parties in the race. You were given 4 or 5 different options that you actually could pick from and say, you know what? These options could probably provide better alternatives in leadership. You show to the world that again, you don't care about yourselves. You rather remain beggars. You rather continue to seek handouts. The same activities that were done or carried on by previous leaders are being repeated, but you will always justify these actions because, again, one would say you find yourselves in a state of being morons. When you're a moron, you don't care how you're treated. And this is how Liberians have accepted to be treated. So I'm gonna play this portion of the I want to play this portion of the interview again, purposely to speak to your conscience, to remind you that look, regardless of where you find yourselves, you should not continue to dwell on this idea of having someone to be your hero. I always say this to people, especially the young people back home. Initially, there were times where these young people will come in your box, in your DM. Uh, the hero. I'm like, I'm nobody's hero. Because when you start to accept these kind of title, these kind of nomenclatures, guess what happened next? Now they put you on the pedestal where you forget your purpose and what you sincerely stand for. Then you start to be mischaracterized. And if you don't want to do that, you must set your own borderline. You must say to them, while it is true that I appreciate your compliment or your appreciation of my little contribution, I still believe there are bigger and better things, and you must be a part of the process. You should join me. Let us all fight together to get rid of bad governance, bad leaders in our community. And these things don't start at the national level. It starts in the community, it starts in the home, and then they work their way to national government. And this is why we're struggling today when we have bad leadership, because we are not considering the past performance of future leaders. What have you done? What did you do in the past? But let's listen to the professor here again. Like I said, folks, I really wanted to sit and listen, but I think it's only fair that I charm in here to highlight some key statements that I made. So I will play this part for us to listen again.
With us, I guess let's take a very quick break. We have with us Prof. P.L.O. Lumumba right now. So let's take this quick break. When
Sorry, guys, I went too far.
use of delimitation of economic zones, he also did his LMTC's titled National Security and Fundamental Rights. So he's a man who cuts across. He's an orator, an outspoken one, heavily followed across the world, especially the African continent. Welcome, sir.
Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm glad to have this conversation with you. But in order to ensure that I'm not accused of misrepresentation, I was the director of Kenya School of Law, but that was 4 years ago. I served my term, and somebody is now serving.
Okay.
It's important to point out that
Perfect.
current reality.
That is perfect. How is life? You are a busy man. You are all across. You are invited to speak at different places. You are involved in different things. How is life with you?
Life is a struggle. Life is about one's contribution. And what we are doing as we travel across Africa and the world is to reawaken the African spirit, to give practical meaning to Pan-Africanism, standing as we are on the shoulders of those who preceded us. And what one does when one has the opportunity or create the opportunity is to make one's contribution. That is what I am doing, making my contribution in the knowledge and in the hope that our little contributions put together will create a tsunami which will bring about positive change in the continent of Africa to our sons and daughters within the continent and in the diaspora.
You have this gift for gap and oration and logic and wisdom. What is the motivation? Where is it from?
When one speaks the language of the heart through the lips, one does what is good and right to the extent that is possible. So I speak from my heart. I speak from conviction. I speak from the thing that I know, and I try to speak about things that are practical with what I consider to be a honest view and honest intention. I don't succeed all the times, but I succeed most of the time.
Well, you have been a guest of the International Association of Judges, having some programs in Liberia to come and speak. I followed your speech online today talking about different issues of justice and the judicial systems across the continent and all of that. What is key in terms of the delivery of justice, the rule of law, the implementation of the rule of law across African countries? What is more important?
You know, justice is an avenue along which all of us walk. And the signposts are the laws which we are supposed to observe. The judges are the custodians. And the conversation that we have had here in Monrovia with judges from 14 African countries is to discuss the value of integrity.
Hmm.
Integrity to ensure that the men and women who have the honor and privilege of serving as judges dispense justice in accordance with law from a standpoint of integrity. And we have asserted that integrity is.
So his emphasis here, the emphasis on integrity, integrity. If you listen to him, he's emphasizing on the responsibility, and he even considered the judges as custodians. And you all, I mean, Gwen, welcome to the show. Thank you for being here, guys. If you will, please share the show. When you're listening, and those of you on here, I don't think there's anybody on here who needs to have the word custodian defined. Okay, so we'll not waste our time on that. But when someone tells you your judges are custodians of the law, then I want you to also think about the most recent incident, the case of the young girl who was almost slaughtered, okay, killed. The alleged perpetrator walked scot-free with all of the needed, I don't know how to even describe, because I'm not a legal mind, okay? I'm not a legal practitioner, but I think there were signs and symptoms all over as to what may have happened. But because our legal system, the judges are not people with integrity, they don't value human life. So they will not see reason to perform their duties with integrity. Their focus point is going to be on, what do I get from here? Because if I don't do it, or if I do it, I still get what I want anyway. The low purse, the low handout, the brown envelope. Because remember, the people you voted into office who's supposed to be a true representation of you, they themselves don't even have integrity. They will take the brown envelopes and they will walk away with it. Like what is being stated today in the public space, that some of your representatives took money, they took handouts in order to carry on a specific tax. It is alleged. Now, what becomes of the women in the market? You don't hear them sit to argue as to why it is important that the way things are conducted in the local markets are regulated and the laws are applied not only to the women in the market, but it's also applied to the ones who are seeking the third lane. The guys who are telling you that they prefer or they should be considered the best to have a third lane should also abide by the rules and regulations. They are not making those arguments. They are not considering the plight of the people, the women who actually gets up in the morning, go to the market and try to sell cassava leaves to send her kids to school. They are not propagating the message or messages of those women. Guess what they're doing? They are figuring how they can actually enrich themselves and that of their girlfriends or boyfriends or the immediate relatives at the detriment of the suffering masses. But guess what you do? You come right back and then you vote them into office because you are now within their circle. They consider you, they refer to you as their comrades. Comrades, come on here, and you jump on their bandwagons. And the minute they ascend to those positions, they see you as nobody. And these are some of the reasons why, throughout the elections, some of us sat on various platforms and propagated the message of the opportunity to now transform Liberia. You had options, not one, not two, but three formidable forces, people who could have transformed Liberia over time. You missed out on that opportunity. But let's listen to the professor even more. Again, folks, I'm going to jump in here and there to actually be a part of the conversation. Let's just make it a little bit more interactive.
Something that must ensure that one does that which is good and right because it is good to do so. And it requires men and women who are fearless. It requires men and women who are patriotic. It requires men and women who are knowledgeable. It requires men and women who are warriors for justice, because justice is what guarantees that people live in a society, their station in life notwithstanding.
Yeah, and you were talking also about the contextualization of the dispensation of justice in terms of local context. And
Yes.
Yeah, you want to advance on that. Why is that important?
You know, if you don't contextualize the administration of justice, then you are a stranger. You come to Liberia and there are certain things that Liberia and even different Liberian communities want to be done. If you are administering justice relating to land, and you go to the land of the Mandinka or the Malinke or to the Kisi peoples, and you are not sensitive to the realities, then what you consider to be justice will be resisted. If you go to a society and you don't consider their tradition, and you don't consider how they do things, then your brand of justice will invariably be discarded and you'll create discord into the community. We live in a world today where there is what I call cultural imperialism. And this cultural imperialism is coming, as it has always done, from particularly Europe and America. And we also see elements of it from China and different parts of the world. It is therefore important that those who are administering justice in various African countries are sensitive to the realities. We have a saying in Kiswahili that he or she who abandons culture is a slave. And therefore, if you want to be true to yourself, if you want to enjoy your freedom to the fullest, you've got to understand the environment in which you operate. You've got to be agile. As a student of martial arts, I always remember this.
You're also a student of martial arts. Okay, I see why you look fit. Even
Yeah.
at 61 years, you look quite younger.
Oh yeah. Bruce Lee used to say that if you want to be a good martial artist, you must be like water. Water can be liquid. Water can be it can be a gas. Water can also be solid. And in its liquid form, it occupies and takes the shape of whatever it occupies without changing its quality and character. And that is what we need to adopt and adapt in order to be relevant. Remember also that Africa does not exist in isolation. We exist as a part of the world, but even in that, we must never lose our character. You can make a forest, but each tree has its distinctive and distinct quality.
Well, but then people could argue that justice is like air. It is cosmic. The tenets of justice, the moral laws are supposed to be cosmic. They are supposed to apply to all, no matter where a person is.
That is what I call sophistry. People can argue about anything. But we know that what is justice, the justice of the slave owner is not the justice of the slave. The justice of those who operated camps in Nazi Germany was not the same justice that was perceived by those whom they were victimizing. The justice of the architects of apartheid was not the justice that can be described as universal. So there are certain elements that you can say to be universal. Take, for example, in 1948, when the international community, in the absence of Africa, says that certain rights are universal. Were Africans present during that time? No, they were not. When the colonial administration said that Africans were less than human beings, was that justice? So it is right to say that there are certain things that can now be considered to be of a universal character, but justice must also be contextual. Decontextualized justice is injustice. And that is one of the things that we must accept. Will we have a unanimous position? No. Unanimity only exists in the graveyard. When you have human beings, even when you talk about things that appear to be obvious, they'll be debated. But ultimately, even in the midst of debate, there is what must emerge as the acceptable standard from which, if you deviate, then society punishes you.
And that would drive me to the issue of war and economic crimes. For example, our country fought years of civil war, and there has been this push for the establishment of a war economic crimes court to punish those who bear the greatest responsibilities for the war. Recently, our president signed the executive order for the establishment of an office that will go after the processes of implementing this war economic crimes court, praised by the Americans and the Europeans as being a good path for our country. What do you think?
Let me tell you, history has demonstrated not once, not twice, but times without number, that if crimes are not punished, they'll be repeated again. Impunity is the mother's milk of terror. And it is therefore always important that if a society goes through a process where certain individuals or groups of individuals have perpetrated certain crimes, they ought to be taken through a process to determine their culpability. Will it always be right? Not always. That is why there must be a mix. Those who know have always said that in order to ensure that there is sustainable peace, those who bear the greatest responsibility must be punished. But it's also important that memories are selective so that you reconcile society. And I will give you a recent example. After the genocide in Rwanda in 1994, the international community created the International Tribunal for Rwanda. Those who committed the most egregious of the crimes were punished. But the Rwandese administration, post-genocide, in their wisdom, then went back into their tradition, into the Gacaca courts. And they said, in order to reconcile society, we are going to allow the perpetrators to come forth and repent, then we'll forgive them. That happened, and the society is going through a process of reconciliation. In South Africa, after apartheid, the Truth, Justice, and Reconciliation Commission was also put together for purposes of healing the society. In Mozambique, during the administration of President Samora Moises Machel, those who had collaborated with the Portuguese were named and shamed. Then they were rehabilitated. My point is, we must never allow impunity to bestride our societies, because if that happens, then society will be visited by the same pain again. But if people are tried and those who are culpable are found guilty and punished or forgiven, it doesn't mean that those who are found to be culpable will be punished, but at least it will give the society an opportunity to reconcile.
Let us get that point. Yes. Punished or forgiven. Yes. So it becomes a responsibility of the society whether they want to forgive them or to punish them.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, because we have a whole lot to talk about.
Yes.
So, thankfully, you also headed the Kenya Anti-Corruption Commission at one point in time. Corruption, you've always spoken against it. It ties in with the issues of poverty that becloud the continent. Uh, Countries are so rich, like for example, our country, rich in a whole lot of resources, with a highly younger population and all of that. But we are still poor. We sit among and over riches and resources, but we are still poor. What is happening here?
The conundrum of poverty in Africa is an oxymoron, and I'm using this very deliberately. We are possibly one of the richest continents on earth with the poorest people on earth. And even if you look at the individual countries, look at the resources, the rubber, the ore, the uranium, the gold, the diamond, our soils, which are fertile. One person once said that poverty is a choice which African politicians have chosen because it is in their best interest to keep their populations poor so that they can manipulate them. And I hold the view that African countries are number one poor because the quality of leadership that we consistently give ourselves are not in the business of trying to resolve the problems.
Guys, let me say this. Let me add this to what the professor just said. Just to reiterate, poverty is a choice. Your politicians, the Darius Dillon, the Edward Snow, the Boycott, Ellen, President Weah, all of those you entrusted with leadership, they chose poverty over you. They did not see reason to stand up against poverty because they felt like you, the people, you are of less importance. That's the reason why a man like Edwin Snow, Prince Johnson, and other people will be serving in leadership today. Thought to highlight that part of it.
That chain our people. It is also true that there are external players who, because of our disorganization and the greed of our politicians, continue to manipulate us with the consequence that our country's resources are still exported in their raw form to those countries. And thirdly, we ourselves, we the population, are also complicit because when we are given an opportunity to elect good men and women, invariably in Africa, 9 out of 10 times, we choose, as I've said before, we choose hyenas to take care of our goats. And when the goats begin to die, we begin to wonder what is happening.
That part right there, that part when we are given good men to lead us, we will rather select hyenas to take care of the goats. When we are given good men, when I say these things, I feel proud saying them because I feel like the opportunity was given to us, but we chose to select hyenas to take care of our goats. Look where we are today. Your president is flying with private jets and lying that his friends give it to him. You see how we think? A man who served in government for 40 some more years without any footprint, any major impact in government that you can feel today. You didn't see reason to say we must move forward. You chose to go with the same individual, either on the basis of tribe, on the basis of political affiliation, on the basis of selfishness, and because a lot of you are lazy, vast majority of those of you who packed your bag and ran from here to Liberia, you're so damn lazy, you cannot compete in the real world where it is competitive and you will be scrutinized. Jobs or opportunities are awarded to people based on merits, not based on mediocrity or based on your close proximity to whoever. It is based on merits. And because a lot of you are so lazy, both mentally, psychologically, physically, you grabbed your bags and ran to Liberia. Where there isn't a job is where you're seeking job. Where there is job and you're seeking people, professionals, you're running away from it because of your lazy idea. And this is where you all will give in to the hyenas to say, here, take on leadership. When you know deep down your heart, a lot of you, the people you elected to support, you know deep down your heart that these people were failures. They had no chance of transforming Liberia, but because it was in your selfish interest, you thought the best route was to put Liberia behind you and put those individuals ahead of you. And that's why we're here today. And this is exactly what he's saying here. When the opportunity is given you to elect good leaders, you refuse to do that. That's exactly what the professor is saying here.
So it's a combination of factors. It is now the duty of younger Africans to make demands. That is what has happened throughout history. It happened in Europe during the French Revolution. It happened in China. It happened in South Korea. We must be consistent in making demands and also participating to ensure that we change the circumstances of our countries by rolling up our sleeves and doing that which is good and right for the benefit of this generation and generations yet to come.
Let me take you to point one about the quality of leadership and making mistakes. The population will argue that we may not know the intentions of people. Politicians will present themselves as having the best plans and the saviors and here and there, and we elect them and they mess up. So how can the population know who the best leaders are that will actually move the country forward?
You know, it allows me to answer a question that you posed about corruption in the first place. Most African politicians engage in corruption, and that is one of the factors that undermines our well-being. We people now go into politics in Africa because it is the shortest avenue to acquiring material wealth. But coming to the question that you posed about knowing the intentions of individuals, you know, I've always said that leaders do not become bad. Power does not make people bad. Power reveals who people truly are. And if you care to examine people correctly, you are.
This was exactly my point yesterday on the closing argument. Okay? This issue of, oh, he became a bad leader when he got to the presidency or a bad president when he got to the Senate. When I make these claims, I include myself for a reason. The reason why I include myself is because we all continue to make bad decisions. But are we willing to be reprimanded? Are we willing to take on that responsibility to say, yes, I made a mistake, but I want to fix it. I want to use the mistake that I made to have supported Darius DeLon, to educate myself so that it is not repeated in the near future. Because this individual in Darius DeLon, whom I saw as the light, became the real Darius DeLon that other people told me about. The one who decided to lean on the side he never believed or trusted. These are the things that are supposed to be going through my mind. When this individual should have been at the forefront of true transformation, regardless of his disagreement, I think Liberia should have been at the forefront of his decision. Whether he disagreed politically, but you notice that throughout his endeavor, it was all about Darius DeLon, Yombi Kanga, Darius DeLon, Yombi Kanga, Darius DeLon, Yombi Kanga, Darius DeLon, Yombi Kanga. It was all about them. He totally forgot Liberia, the bigger picture. So if we cannot sit and think about these things and say, look, you know what? To what extent can we consider putting Liberia first? Then we will continue to go down the drain because we will continue to elect or support bad leaders. And in this case, that's part of the reason why I hold myself accountable for my contribution. Nevertheless, I will not waver in my fight for change because change is not instantaneous. At least I learned because it is processed and based on the progress we notice, we will continue to make some kind of, rectification along the wayside. That is where we need to play our role because we cannot read the minds of humans. We cannot read their hearts. We are not sockets. But guess what? We can learn from the past. One thing I can tell you is I knew darn well that Honorable Boykai won't have been any different from President Weah based on his past records. That is just my point. And I can say today that the case have been made. I am vindicated that, of course, the same things that President Weah did, he's replicating those same things. He brought a bunch of boys and few hustlers to pretend as though they're supposed to be asset recovery team. How the hell in the world are you going to bring these hustlers to go hustle? How in the world can you bring an armed robber to prosecute other armed robbers? Who does that in their right mind? Who does that? You selected armed robbers because they rose to the rank and files of, in society, I should say. So you said, okay, now that they're at the top, where they are no longer taking the guns to people's doors and they are no longer the one putting the guns to people here to take people property. So now we should entrust them to prosecute those that are taking the guns to people's doors and to people here and asking them for their money or their property. And you tell yourself you're making a rational decision in the best interest of Liberians. Who as a leader sincerely think in that direction? What happened to a population of 5 million? You're telling me we cannot find competent Liberians with integrity, morals, and ethical beliefs. You're telling me we cannot bring or encourage them to come to Liberia and go after what we need and build the foundation, hopefully break what we already have because we don't have a foundation, and bring forth an actual foundation with steel so that we can prosecute corrupt or government officials. Everyone wants to be a part of a low clique. They don't want to go after their colleagues because they are afraid that if they are ever to go after them, then the friendship is over. Have you ever noticed how often when you're discussing national issues, everybody, this man is my friend and brother. That person is my friend and brother. Have you ever heard that? I mean, almost everybody just say that. It almost appears as though it's a cliche. Oh, that person is my friend and brother. That person is my friend and brother. Because they are afraid to go after that person because they know they themselves have some kind of hidden agenda. If they are ever given the opportunity to serve, they may just do just exactly what that person did. So they're afraid to publicly engage that person, disagree with them, pursue them in however way because they are afraid. And this is where I draw the line. But anyway, let's continue to listen to the professor. Sieta, you're going to have to listen to me a lot more than that. You get over it.
Able to identify who is not and should not be a politician to serve you. So this idea that we were misguided, this idea that we were confused is, in my view, largely without merit. If a politician comes and tells you, I'm going to give you money in order to vote, if a politician comes and tells you, vote me because I'm your tribe, if a politician comes and tells you, vote me because I'm from your religion, that leader, that politician is without merit. Julius Nyerere of Tanzania used to say that any politician who is bankrupt of ideas will always appeal to religion or appeal to emotions and pride and use bribery. But any politician who wants to serve their country will present an agenda and will not overpromise.
Okay.
Because when they...
Exactly. Did I not say this during the campaign? Any politician with good vision will make their case based on their agenda, their vision for a better Liberia. Any politician, any politician who sincerely believe they understand, they know the root cause of the problem we are experiencing in Liberia. They will give you their agendas, they will give you the solution. But when you start hearing people say, oh, the old man just want one term, just give it to the old man. So, after he's not going for a second term, he just wants 6 years. You should know that they have no idea. They have no agenda. It will be in the process to which they will just slap something together to work off. And remember, you're not promised tomorrow. So 6 years of your life that you have to sit and wait for somebody to play guessing game. Your kids, your grandkids, your immediate relatives. Okay? What becomes of them? There were young people who started this fight for justice and accountability. There were young people who started the fight for a better Liberia. Today, I can say to you, and I mentioned the name of the young Wayne Selly. A lot of you on here know who Wayne Selly is. That young man was in the sun, he was in the rain, he went to Liberia on numerous occasions, he advocated
They overpromise, they cannot deliver because they must be modest in what they are capable of achieving. So even as we accuse these individuals, we who are the voters, and I do not know, but I think it is Corazon Cojuangco, Queen of Philippines, at one time the president said that what is called democracy, where the voters do not know why they are voting, is nothing but a confederacy and a conspiracy of fools.
Wow, and quite powerful, and it all.
Guys, I'm sorry, I have to play this again. Did you guys just hear what he said? Did you hear what he said? Let me play this part just for a reason that I think is very important to Liberia. A few seconds back. All right. Listen to what he just said.
About knowing the intentions of individuals. You know, I've always said that leaders do not become bad. Power does not make people bad. Power reveals who people truly are. And if you care to examine people correctly, you are able to identify who is not and should not be a politician to serve you. So this idea that we were misguided, this idea that we were confused is, in my view, largely without merit. If a politician comes and tells you, I'm going to give you money in order to vote, if a politician comes and tells you, vote me because I'm your tribe, if a politician comes and tells you, vote me because I'm from your religion, that leader, that politician is without merit. Julius Nyerere of Tanzania used to say that any politician who is bankrupt of ideas will always appeal to religion or appeal to emotions and tribe and use bribery. But any politician who wants to serve their country will present an agenda and will not overpromise. Okay. Because when they overpromise, they cannot deliver because they must be modest in what they are capable of achieving. So even as we accuse these individuals, we who are the voters, and I do not know, but I think it is Corazon Cojuangco, a queen of Philippines, at one time the president said that what is called democracy, where the voters do not know why they are voting, is nothing but a confederacy and a conspiracy of fools.
A confederacy and a conspiracy of fools when you don't know why you are voting. You vote based on music. You not all, I'll vote for you. You kill my mind, kill my power, I'll vote for you. You know book, you don't know book, I will vote for you. How you consider yourself? I agree. You're labeled son of my swines. You say, I agree. Somebody insult you, reference you as sons and daughters of swines, and then you say you agree. You went and voted in that direction. But you consider yourself sophisticated, educated people to represent an entire nation, but you accept it to be considered sons and daughters of swines. You say, I agree. You just listen to the prof. You were not voting or supporting an individual based on ideas. Your support for this individual was simply based on foolery, fakery, and the words. And some of us are supposed to sit and buy into this nonsense. And why my parents wasted their money on education if you can't even think for yourselves? Okay?
Wow, quite powerful, and it almost smiles of the earlier topic I was talking about, over-promising what you can do in a particular time frame. In the second point, you also mentioned outsiders manipulating our leaders and politicians. Who are these outsiders? And when you talk about exporting raw materials to their countries, why is that a problem? Why is it wrong?
There is a sense in which there are different types of outsiders. There are those who have what I call the political, geopolitical interests. These are the big powers. You'll find powers from Western Europe, from the United States of America, from Russia, from China. Lately we see even the Emiratis, the Turks. And that is the law. The reality of the world is that it is the law of the jungle, survival of the fittest and the dying of the least suitable. And if you are not organized, and most African countries are disorganized, we operate in silos, and therefore we are easy to manipulate. And if you allow yourself to be manipulated, the European Union will manipulate you, the Americans will manipulate you, the Turks will manipulate you, the Chinese will manipulate you, Russia will manipulate you, the Japanese will manipulate you, because you are weak, and every country does what is in their best interest. When you hear some of us say that the safety for Africa not only requires but demands that we work as a united force, we mean that is the only way in which we are going to ensure that the neo-colonial project does not succeed. Because as Kwame Nkrumah said many years ago, the colonialist does not change his DNA. He simply wears a different mask. He comes, once he had ceased to be the colonialist, he now comes as an investor. And they have appetite for things. They have appetite for iron ore. They don't want you to add value. They have appetite for rubber. They don't want you to make tires and to make gloves. And it is our duty to realize what our self-interest is. That is what Africa does not do as often as it should. I now know that there are attempts at doing that. It started the Lagos Plan of Action in 1980. It is now encapsulated in Africa Agenda 2063 and the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. But Africa is quick to make declarations. Africa is quick to make protocols. Africa is quick to promise what our leaders don't lead us in the direction of delivery. And I am saying that the time is now. Because if we are not careful, if we continue on this trajectory of being weak and therefore susceptible to manipulation, Africa will be recolonized. And this time round, they'll not recolonize you by having presidents who are white or yellow. What they'll do is to control your economy. Because once they control your economy, as the saying goes, he or she who pays the piper calls the tune. So you'll sit in this radio station and the person who pays will tell you, I don't like that broadcast. Shut it down. And that is what they tell countries. They ring your president and say, Mr. Man, we don't like the direction that you are going. We don't care that is in the best interest of your citizen. We don't care about your citizens. We care about ourselves and by extension our citizens. Africa must liberate ourselves and be on the trajectory of economic flight, because when you are strong, your voice is listened to.
Now, on the issues of resources and how they could work for the African people, I'm using our own country since you're here, because we have a whole lot of resources. A 5+ million population, 63,000 square miles, not so big, not a huge population. We should be some of the richest people anywhere on the planet, isn't it?
Yes.
So what could happen? What are certain policies officials, private sector, people could employ to ensure that these resources now are benefiting the owners of the land?
Let me give you a clear example. Liberia is about 111,000 square kilometers, population say of 5 million. Let's look at a single sector in energy. Liberia does not generate more than 1,000 megawatts of electricity.
Not more than 88.
Yeah. And let's look at another country in Europe, Denmark, which has a size of about 43,000 square kilometers, a population just about the same, generates 35,000 megawatts of electricity, more than all of sub-Saharan countries combined, excluding South Africa. What did they do that we must now do? Number one, ensure that you have policies that enable private sector. Ensure that you have a government that is controlling and facilitating private sector, so that your laws require of investors that even as they earn profit, it is replowed back. Number two, ensure that you have energy that will allow for industrialization. If it is in agriculture, ensure that you do not export primary goods to the extent that is possible, you value add. And if you do that, in the next 10 years, you'll see that the circumstances of your country begin to improve. It is easier said than done, but we have seen in our lifetime countries which had resources using those resources in a dramatic way. Look at Qatar. What does Qatar have? Gas. And how have they leveraged on gas to ensure that there is value addition, and therefore they have improved the quality of their people. They import high quality labor. Look at Dubai, which is one of the Emirates. It doesn't produce oil. People think that Dubai as an emirate has oil. It's the Abu Dhabis have oil. Look at Bahrain. Look at Oman. It can be done within the continent of Africa. Look at what Mauritius is doing. Look at what Botswana is doing. And I hold the view that a country like Liberia, with resources which is bordering the Atlantic Ocean, if you have the right policies and the politicians are committed, the population is invariably ready to follow people who are doing the right thing. Because what does an average Liberian want? Good quality of life. How do you guarantee good quality of life? By improving the people's income. How do you improve the people's income? Is in order to add value to your resources and make people be in an environment where they can invest, because government can only employ so many. Look at Liberia. I went to the United States several years ago in Minnesota and in places like Philadelphia, and you find Liberians in the diaspora. If they are allowed and permitted and an enabling environment is created, they can come here by using their resources. And let me tell you, this Liberia can grow into an economy that will be respected, where people's quality of life is high. It can be done in the next 10 years. Only thing that must be done is that there must be deliberate action on the part of politicians. Will there be difficulties? Yes, there will be difficulties. Will there be headwinds? Yes, there will be headwinds. But I hold the view that history has demonstrated that even in the face of those headwinds, it can't be done. Let me conclude answering that question with a single example. 1975. The only thing that we heard about Vietnam was the war and the American presence. Today, Vietnam is in the textile sector, it is in the paper sector. They are going to surpass many African countries in the production of coffee, and they are adding value to coffee. I look forward to the day when there'll be an iron ore factory here in Liberia. I look forward to the day when rubber will no longer be exported from Liberia, when Firestone will ensure that her presence here is beneficial to the people of Liberia. It can be done, it must be done, because if it is not done, we'll continue to be beggars until the second coming of Jesus Christ.
His name is Dr. Professor P.L. Olumumba. This is the OK Conversation on OKFM 99.5. He's taking some time out with us. Now, how then can these African countries, it is a two-pronged question. One, how can Africans work among themselves as African countries to beef up their own economies like the European Union did? That's one. Two, how can each country try to navigate within the international system of things and maintain its ability to develop itself, knowing that there are these powerful countries that are always breathing down our necks?
You know, one of the things that Africa must do is to stop operating in silos. And that is why I love the very early, some say even romantic call about Pan-Africanism in 1963. But we then have now recognized that if we don't want to have what I call the Big Bang African unity, at least we can start regionally. Look at ECOWAS. If within ECOWAS we identify the strengths of Liberia, Sierra Leone, Mauritania, Senegal, Nigeria, and Ghana, and all the countries of ECOWAS, we can then agree that each country becomes the home of the materials in which she is strongest. Once we have done that, we identify our weakness. We say we have energy. We need energy. Can La Côte d'Ivoire produce energy? Can Nigeria produce energy? Then we solve that problem. Does Nigeria have oil, or Ghana has oil, or Gabon has oil on those countries? And do we need a single currency? Yes, we do need a single currency. Once we identify all those, and my brother, all those things were identified, under the Lagos Plan of Action in 1908, it was identified there must be enhanced intra-African trade. We start with ECOWAS, and you go to the Maghreb, do Maghreb. You go to Central Africa, you do Central Africa. You go to East Africa, do East Africa. You go to the Horn, do the Horn. You go to SADC, do the SADC. And within that, you then aim to be continental. And one of the things that you want to do is to remove the visa regime. How can it be that when I travel from Nairobi, Kenya, I require a visa in Liberia? I shouldn't have it. Because a European today is capable of traveling from Bratislava in Slovakia through to the Canary Islands or through to Lisbon in Portugal without a visa. And they are using 27 countries or thereabouts are using a single currency called the euro. But here you come to Liberia, the dollar. You go to the next.
We have two kinds of dollars.
You go to the Liberian dollar. Yeah. Then you go to the Lassie. Then once you do that, then you are weak and you cannot facilitate. So you look to the United States of America as your Mecca and as your true north, and therefore you don't care about the continent of Africa. I believe that these things can be done, and they can only be done if we collaborate. If, for example, the European Union wants to negotiate with Liberia, they should be told, no, we are going to negotiate with you in the context of ECOWAS or in the context of the African Union with the Liberian issues being discussed in that context. But today, you hear China, coming here, we are negotiating with the Liberia. Every country with Liberia. Then at one point, we are negotiating with ECOWAS. Then we are negotiating with the African Union. The more confused we are, the safer they are. And they love it that way. Then they invite you to their countries and they offer you 21 gun salutes, or they allow you to do a few things and you think you are equal. If the economy, the GDP of Liberia is smaller than the GDP of Shanghai.
Yeah, by far.
By far. So Liberia is safer within ECOWAS. Liberia is safer within the African Union. And that is true of Sierra Leone, it's true of Mali, it's true of Benin, it's true of Gabon. That is the gospel that we must preach across the continent of Africa. That is the gospel that Nkrumah preached. That is the gospel that Sekou Touré preached. That is the gospel that must remain alive. That is the gospel that we are now, and hope that President Boakai will begin to preach. Because if he begins to preach it, then his foot soldiers will understand one thing, that the Liberia we want to build is a Liberia whose sons and daughters will be proud of. A Liberia, when I was in school, I used to hear that Liberia had one of the largest populations of ships sailing the seas with her flag. That is a source of income.
It still does.
And it should monetize it. I want to hear that Liberia earns $2 billion out of that. It can't be done. Panama does that. I want to hear that. I want to hear that Liberia attracts 20 million tourists, not 500,000. It can't be done. I want to hear that Liberia, this old country created in the 19th century by men of color, that this country is united and moving in the right direction. It can't be done. I want to hear that Liberia is the home of those who want to come back to the continent. I want to hear that people are investing here from the diaspora, 230 million of them. If Liberia only gets 50 million of them putting their money here, you imagine what Liberia would be. I want to hear that the 15 counties of Liberia has an anchor project which is generating jobs and producing money. It can't be done. And I want to hear that Nigeria has ambassadors drawn from African countries who are saying the place to go to is Monrovia in Liberia, and there'll be a flag standing and calling Africans, come and invest with us for the sake of the continent. It can't be done. It must be done.
It certainly can be done. Africa is one of the youngest in terms of population age. There's a terrible story of lots of young Africans dying at sea, crossing over to Europe, and all that kind of thing. What should leaders focus on so that if their people are traveling out, it is because they want to learn, it's because they want opportunities that they can go the right way and still be beneficial to their own countries. But besides, how can the conditions back home improve so that young people can experience the development of their full potentials and don't necessarily have to take risky ventures?
You know, my brother, there was a time I saw and listened to an interview of a young lady drawn from an African country. She had been in Libya for 1 year. And she was asked, after being rescued from the Mediterranean Sea, are you not going back home? She said, I will never go back home. I prefer to die in the Mediterranean Sea. That is not a normal instinct. And any leader of any country that watches that and does not get pained or touched is an animal. And it has pained me many times that when people are dying in the Mediterranean Sea or off the Atlantic coast, it is the European leaders who convene meetings. I've never seen in the recent past African leaders meeting in Addis Ababa and saying there is a crisis, our young men and women are running away. What are they running away from? The time has come, and you are so right in saying, nobody is saying that young Africans should not look for opportunities outside. They should. But from a standpoint of dignity and seeking to acquire better information or to serve their desires in those countries. But those who are running away from their countries and dying in the Sahara Desert and in the seas are desperate. What must we do beyond complaining? Make the conditions at home conditions that give people hope. Many young people graduate from high school, from university as engineers, sometimes doctors and other professionals. And they are in their home, they see no hope. There is no promise. They see the politicians have literally captured their country and held it on a choke. It is struggling to survive. They look at the environment is poisonous. Then they say, I'm going to the United States of America to flip hamburger. I'm going to Saudi Arabia to be an au pair because it is all about survival. Yet, the environment at home is pregnant with opportunities, and our politicians are killing the babies and causing stillbirths. Have you ever wondered that Africa is the richest continent on earth and our people are the poorest? And paradoxically, our politicians are some of the richest in the world relative to our GDPs. Selfish individuals. But young Africans must also remain at home, some of them, and make demands of the politician. History has demonstrated that if you make demands, you can drive them out of home and make changes. We have seen it. Some may not like what is happening in the Sahel, in Burkina, or in Mali, or in Niger, or in Guinea-Conakry, but those young soldiers, what they are saying, we have waited for too long. We have seen the vote being manipulated for too long. We have seen the political class abuse us for too long. We are now using the position that we have and the weapon that we have to scare them so that they can allow us to rebuild the country. My only prayer and hope is that those young men will allow themselves to be taught, and they will be in office only as long as is necessary to midwife a new, more participatory process.
Well, one could say that you are supportive of military takeovers.
I understand why that happens. When you corner a people and they have no opportunity, their sons and daughters will use extraordinary means. And I remember these words of Kwame Nkrumah in 1957. I think I may be wrong about the year, but this is what he said. It is the duty of men and women in uniform to be subservient to civilian authority. But if it becomes absolutely necessary and in their wisdom they choose to overthrow the constitution in order to restore order, it may be painful, even disgusting. But they must be reminded that that intervention must only be for a short time for the purpose of restoring order. So when we say we understand, it does not mean we support. It simply means that we appreciate the circumstances that allow that to happen. And that in itself sometimes is necessary because we have seen elections, African politicians, some of them have mastered the art of manipulating electoral processes so that you vote, as Anastasio Somoza once said in Nicaragua when he had lost the election, and he told those who had lost or been declared the loser, he told them, we know you won the vote, but we won the count. That is the situation in which and the circumstances in which we are beginning to understand. When a cat is cornered, the cat will come back fighting.
It is often said that no country can develop beyond the capacity of its educational system, the mentality of its people, and all of that. I want you to talk a bit about the educational systems we have on the continent. What can happen to make it relevant for the growth and development we desire?
Every African country has a duty to examine and re-examine their curriculum. Liberia is unique in the manner in which it came about. Freed slaves came here to join their brothers and sisters who are already here and created what we now know as Liberia. But many African countries suffered the injustice of colonization and the injustice of partition at Berlin, and then became the subject of European colonizers. And during the entire period when the European colonizers were present in this continent, the education system that they created was meant to serve France, was meant to serve the United Kingdom, meant to serve Germany when they were still colonizers, meant to serve Belgium, meant to serve Italy, meant to serve Spain, meant to serve Portugal. When we regained independence, many African countries did not revamp their education system. They continued with them, they tinkered with them a little. That is why we still have countries, we are producing engineers, but when we want to build our roads, who do we ask to build our roads? It's the Europeans and the Chinese. That is why we have all these qualifications. We have our doctors. When politicians are sick, they go to Arabia or go to the United States of America or to Europe because we don't have faith in our education system. Are there countries that I can talk about which, after regaining their independence or regaining control of their affairs, have re-examined their education system? Yes. Some will argue Korea was not occupied for a very long time, but look at the manner in which the Koreas after the war, particularly South Korea, have ensured that they are in the technological space. Look at even Vietnam, which is now getting into that space. Look at Brazil in the recent past. Look at China after they were devastated by the British during the Opium War, and within the last 30 years, see what they have done. Look at Turkey when Ataturk became a power. Look at what is happening in those countries. And what I'm therefore saying, that it is incumbent upon African countries to re-examine their curriculum in order to produce young men and women who are going to be able to participate in this technology age. If you are talking about internet, you are talking about artificial intelligence. Do you think that the men and women, the young men and women who are being taught in our schools are going to be able to compete with those who are making drones? Are they going to be able to compete with those who are in making elevators, those who are involved in artificial intelligence? Or we still just have examination passing machines who are able to tell us which part of a locust is different from the part of a cockroach? Not that that is not important, it is, but will it catapult us into the orbit of the information age so that we can earn the dividends of the fourth industrial revolution and the fifth industrial revolution? These are the things that we must ask ourselves. And it can be done initially regionally, WAEC in West Africa, East African communities, SADC. And once that is done, then we can be able to compete. If you look at any African country now, including here in Liberia, look at the young men and women who are coming from China. Within a short time, they are multimillionaires. Within a short time, they are building our roads. Within a short time, we trust them to do our buildings. Within a short time, they are importing technology from their country, and we trust them with repairing them. When we want to build ships, we can't build our own ships. We bring marine engineers. When we have mines, the best that our people can do is to go deep into the mines and then bring the ore. And who is refining the ore? Education is at the very heart of it. In fact, it is a cliche, but education is the key to industrialization. And if we don't give that key to our young men and women, others will come with both the locks and the keys, and we'll be participating, and all we'll be doing is praying and fasting in the hope that divinity will shower us with things.
Well, and he gave us brains and resources. I don't think he can physically come to do anything for us.
And he said, go ye and subdue the earth. And what have we allowed the earth to do to us? To subdue us.
Let us talk a bit about agriculture. Self-sufficiency in food production is also key to the survival of humanity. Health. So we want to tie health and agriculture together, how we can make them work for our societies.
If you can't feed yourself, your enemy will feed you, and he'll feed you poison. Look at most of Africa now. Look at the seeds that we have lost. If you go in many African households, we are now buying seeds either from American, European, and Chinese companies. We have lost all our seed, whether it's in maize, whether it's millet, whether it's cassava, whether it's rice. And the net effect is that we do not know what we are eating, genetically manipulated. And I'm not one to say that science should not be used to improve the quality of seeds, but I'm one to say that if you do not know how that is happening, then you are consuming that which you do not know. Today, Africa is a net importer of grains. We import wheat, we import rice, we import, if you go into poultry, we import chicken from Brazil, we import chicken feed from Brazil, we are importing tilapia from China, which means that the world is feeding us. And yet, if you look at our land, they are arable. If you go to a place like Zimbabwe, it has and can produce grain. If you go to South Africa, Kenya, Tanzania, Zambia, Malawi, and we still depend on rain-fed agriculture. And what you eat determines your health condition. You look at the cancer that we now have very early on, setting in at age 20 and age 30. Do we know what we are eating? Do we know what the toxicity? Do we know the fertilizers that we are using? Where are they coming from? In other words, I can't agree with you more. That is the duty of Africa to feed ourselves. I'm very happy with the Ethiopians that after realizing that we over-relied on Ukraine for grain supply, they are now going into the arena of ensuring that they are sufficient in the production of wheat. I'm very happy with Ghana because they are beginning to improve production of rice. I'm also very happy with Nigeria in that regard. I'm equally happy with Kenya, which is trying to ensure that we have production of maize. Tanzania is also in that regard. Of course, Rwanda and Uganda. So efforts are being made, but I'm saying that we need to redouble our efforts because we must ensure that we have good agriculture. And I think there is a protocol. If you look at the 7 pillars of the Africa Agenda 2063, one of them is that we must be in a position to feed ourselves. And the Malabo Protocol does encourage Africa to ensure that we produce that which we will satisfy our needs. And linked with that, the Abuja Protocol on Health also requires that we invest in agriculture, we invest in health, and we also reinvest in research and development. One of the things that Africa does not do is to invest in research and development.
Yeah.
Africa must, and in my view, African countries should agree that every country will contribute no less than 1% of its annual budget. I'm not talking about GDP, just budget to finance research institutions, whether it's the Malagasy Institute of Applied Science, whether it's the Louis Pasteur Institute in Senegal, whether it's Kenya Medical Research Institute or International Institute for Livestock. We must finance this. Europe and America is in research. India is in research. The Arab world is in research. Qatar is now hiring farms to cultivate crops in the continent of Africa. In a single sentence, Africa must feed herself. And Africa that feeds herself will control the quality of the food that is on her people's table. And when they do that, they'll be able to say that this is healthy and will become a healthier, younger continent. And in the fullness of time, with the labor that is deliberately applied, Africa will liberate herself from the chains of sorrows and lamentation.
Before we go to the last, because we know you're a busy man, you have to go. I know you earlier met with the vice president. There is private advice given to leaders, and there can be public advice. What can you say to President Boakai, elected in 2023 by the Liberian people? And perhaps you could comment on our elections as well. But what could be your advice?
As you rightly said, I've had a conversation with the vice president, and a very healthy conversation in my view. Number one, I got the impression that he understands the situation in which the country finds herself. And he has what I call a learning spirit. And that is what you need, a learning spirit in order to assess the situation. And somebody like me and others like me who mean well for Liberia, occasionally to consult us, not that because we are experts, but because we wish Liberia well. We are able, without the advantage of expertise, to tell the politicians whom we want to succeed things that must be done. And one of the things is, number one, you've got to take care of the welfare of young people. You've got to take care of basic things such as agriculture. You've got to ensure that you improve production of energy. You've got to ensure that you give investors confidence so that even as they invest in the country, they can take away a portion of their profit, but that profit must be replowed here. And I believe that that is the kind of conversation that you need. And the administration of President Boakai comes at a time when Liberia, like a number of African countries, are suffering in a very major way. First of all, you inherit institutions that are almost crippled by corruption. You inherit countries which are almost bankrupt. You inherit countries which are over-reliant on donor aid. You inherit countries where there are no employment opportunities for young people. You inherit a country where you have impatient young people who can't wait. What do? Because the impatient people, and we discussed this with the vice president, and he agreed. I said, when you are in power, you only have honeymoon during the swearing in. After the swearing in, people want delivery the following day, even if they know it is not possible. But I believe that what must happen is that every country and every leader must identify at least 2 iconic life-changing projects, which he or she will say, we are going to do all these, but judge us on the basis of these 2 iconic projects, which will be life-changing. And you can choose them. You can simply say, like water for every household. Within 6 years, that is possible. Water. Then we are going to go into agriculture. We will feed ourselves. Because agriculture promises you 2 things. Feeding the people and also creating opportunities, jobs, and for people, agro-business. Once you do that, then you'll talk about industrialization. You'll talk about provision of power, because that is a long-term project. And you do that in the knowledge that within your short time in office, you cannot solve all problems. This is an intergenerational problem, is a marathon relay race. You hand over the baton from one generation of leaders to the other. And once you do that, you'll win the people's confidence. And once you have the people's confidence, they will be pushing, there'll be the tailwind that makes you progress. And you must also be honest with the people. Tell them, I promise you, but it's not going to be an easy ride. There'll be bumps, but together we will work and ensure that we land safely.
And fight corruption strongly.
Yes.
Before we go to the lines, were you holding your breath when we were going to elections in 2023? And afterward, did you breathe a sigh of relief?
Yes, indeed. Because, number one, I have a problem. Most African heads of state who are incumbents never want to leave office. And I was relieved when President Weah said, we lost these elections. Whatever other sins he may have committed, at least he did not commit the sin of wanting to stick to office when he knew that he had lost the election. And I think that was a good thing. And I must tell you that I travel across the continent of Africa, and that act is seen as having been a very positive act. So we are happy that you went through that particular bump without an incumbent saying, well,
I won.
I won. What can you do?
I won the count.
I won the count. You won the vote. He did not say that. So we are very happy that that has happened. And we wish the administration of President Boakai luck. And it's not just luck. We also say it is hard work. It is not easy. In fact, those who know always say When you get into the office, that is when you begin to realize that it's not as easy as you thought it would be.
Yeah.
Because you now begin to see things which you could not see when you are outside of the house. And I believe that this is where the road meets the rubber.
Councillor Sema Sarenia Sifa says, let Prof. Lumumba draw us through some of the highs and lows of Liberia in the struggle for self-determination in Africa. Let him tell us the fond memories and what needs to be done to revive that great vision.
You know, when we read about Liberia, we always said this country that was specially created. Then we heard about the difficulties between the indigents and the Americo-Liberians, and we were unhappy that how can one group of people be mistreating another group of people. Then there was the low point during after the administration of Samuel Kanyando, and then there was the civil war. That was one of the most painful things. And it was a pain which I think Liberia has yet to recover from, because the pains of the civil war, the animosity that was created, the suspicion that was created, and then there was the interim administration of, I think, of President Sawyer, that was. Then you midwifed, and I remember that the General Pandey from Kenya was one of the people who were here as the guarantors during the peacekeeping. And we know the opportunities that were lost in terms of the investment and regaining donor and investor confidence again. Then there was the administration of President Johnson Sirleaf, which we thought was a high. Then you didn't fly as high as we thought you would. Then when President Ware came, some of us thought, and at least I thought, that with the clout that he had, using football alone, I thought that he would persuade some of the footballers, multi-millionaires, to adopt each one of the 15 counties in Liberia to build industries. That did not happen. And when I hear and know now that even Liberian civil servants had not been paid for months, then it was a disappointment. And I hold the view that it could have been better during that administration. I now hope that the administration of President Wakai is going to ensure that those holes are sealed and will set Nigeria on a flight path.
Liberia.
So Liberia will set Liberia on a flight path so that Liberia can attain her position. You know, Liberia is iconic. It is iconic because it gave us an opportunity as persons of color to say that it can be done. And if Liberia succeeds, as I want her to succeed, it will be able to send a clear message from Monrovia that it can be done. President Bakai's administration now has that unique opportunity to make Liberia great again.
President Bakai's administration has the unique opportunity to make Liberia great again. The words of Prof. Dr. P.L.O. Lumumba right here on the OK Conversation on OKFM 99.5. We'll take few calls. We have to let him go, but we'll take few calls on 0777 700 995, the international.
All right, folks. I think the gist of this podcast was simply to just emphasize a few points that you all listened to. And I hope that you were able to just grasp a few things from it and hopefully learn from what he actually deliberated on. It is upon all of us to continue to do our part so that we can change Liberia. No one else is going to come to Liberia to change this country. Well, the stubborn ones, we see reason to remain stubborn, but we must be consistent. We will offend family and friends in the process, but it should be about a better Liberia. Folks, thank you all for following. I know it was much more of an impromptu podcast. A lot of you did not expect it, but I'm glad that you stuck around, you listened through, carry the message, You be one of the messengers and don't look for anybody to serve as your hero or hero. You be the heroes and heroes out there. Let's move like bro forward together. Let us strengthen our borderlines. Let us strengthen our resilience. And let us continue to make sure that we have a bigger picture ahead of us. And that bigger picture is Liberia. Thank you all. You all have yourselves a wonderful, wonderful night. And yeah, Friday is almost here. So a lot of you, I know you're celebrating already to be able to get out there and celebrate the Friday. So I'm out. Peace. Enjoy yourselves. Yeah, right. You were the same person out here complaining about me talking. You said I shouldn't be talking here. Now you about to talk about fall asleep. See, you're a typical Liberian. You're a typical Liberian. All right. I don't know. Let me listen to. The fact that Sima Serena Seaford even sent a text message to this reputable individual, and it was read. And man, I'm not listening to the phone calls. I know they're not going to appreciate the message that he actually just delivered because they're not going to get it. All right, folks. Peace out. Happy pre-birthday, Riversis Pro. Tomorrow is your birthday. Happy pre-birthday to you today. Celebrate in grand style.